mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, insomnia, and PTSD.
I remember thinking, I just wanted to come back to work and be a nurse.
At least 15 states have now ceased nearly all abortion services.
The court's ruling is reverberating far beyond the country's borders.
Millions of women in America will go to bed tonight without access to the health care and reproductive care that they had this morning.
It's their future. They have every right to fight it.
The eyes of all future generations are upon you.
The nation is in the grip of a cost of living crisis. Bills are shooting up and are set to rise again in October.
I am anxious thinking about it. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Before full-scale Russian invasion, I was tailor cutter and fashion designer. I love design. I love beautiful, wonderful dresses.
But they were received with open hearts and open arms.
Thousands are taking to the streets in anti-government protests following the death of a 22-year-old woman who was in police custody, arrested by Tehran's morality police for not wearing her headscarf correctly.
در افغانستان بسیار سخت میشه برای زنها.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. Welcome everyone to our annual conference. I would like you to take your seats. We're gonna start, and we are also already live online. So my name is Katja Ziska. Hello from my side. I'm PES Women Coordinator on behalf of the whole PES team, the PES Women team, the technical staff, and everyone. I welcome you to our first physical event since the pandemic. It's been a long time. I also would like to welcome everyone who is online, because of course not everybody could travel to Berlin, so welcome. We are streaming it on YouTube and Facebook Live, so we hope many can also follow us through that option. I wanted to draw your attention to the interpretation devices on the side, because we will have some people speaking in German too. So if you don't speak German or you should not speak English, please take a headset and connect to the interpretation. I also would like to draw your attention to the interpretation tool, which you can scan the QR code here or in the entrance. You see all the lineup, the speakers, their profiles. You can also see there the surveys we do and the Q&A. So if you have any question, you can post your question in this event tool. But we also have microphones on the side, so later at the end of the panels, if you have any questions, please go to the microphones and give a comment if you would like. This tool is of course also to have a paperless conference. It's very easy. You can also save it on your home screen for easier access if you would like to. Yeah, exactly, for the Q&A. After the opening, we will have our first panel, followed by a short coffee break, and then we have an interview with Katharina Barley, and followed by a second panel. We encourage you to tweet about the event with hashtag #MakeHerCount, and to tag PES Women in the ASF, our partner of this conference, the women's organization of the SPD. And for our great moderation today, we have Martin Speer with us. He's author and he for She Catalyst from UN Women Germany. So the discussion is in really good hands today. Because we're in Berlin and it's a physical conference, we have a special surprise for you. And that is the artist collaboration with textile artist Sophie Otikal. I want to thank my friend who recommended her to me. And Sophie, we made a cooperation with the postcards on your chair. We have some other examples on the table. And you can also see her work from 2017 called Flexing. It is about experience of border migration and how you need to navigate in multiple worlds at once. Flexing shows Sophie in a stretching position with weapons and resistance strategies against exclusion, skills to be at home in her own body, across access to marginalized knowledge, but also insecurity symbols in her body. We are super happy about this collaboration, not just to support a local female artist, but also because her work fits well with our topic today. The struggle of women, the war on women's bodies, and other topics. But now, I would like to officially open the conference by giving the floor to our president, Zita Gomay.
Thank you, Katja. I think it's a great privilege to work such an amazing PES women team. Can you make a real wow for Christina, for Katja, and for Frida? Wow! You know, when you don't have a professional team, that you feel that you get bread without salt. So it's like that. So, dear all, it's a great privilege to be in Berlin again for the PES Women Annual Conference, together with ASF, presided by Maria Neuchel, my friend for long, long years. And you know, even we have birthday together. ASF is 50 years old. Let's make a big clap hands for this. We are only 30. Not bad, isn't it? And we still have a lot of fight. But anyway, so today we have the hashtag Make Her Count in Times of Crisis. Progressive answers to gender blindness. And I'm always happy when men are also here with us, because of course we are open. When we talk about equality, we need everybody on the board. And of course, yes, I don't mind. And of course, today we will hear from many members of our political family and experts about how no crisis is gender blind. For me personally, it is very interesting to have this discussion today, as exactly 10 years ago, we had our annual conference in Sofia, in Bulgaria, in 2012, with the title, Women Up Against the Crisis. So highlighting the effect of a crisis on women is a long-standing project of PES Women. One of our main calls back then to increase the presence of women in economic and political decision-making. There has been progress, but clearly not enough. Otherwise, we would not be here today. Gender equality has been hit hard, not just since the COVID pandemic, but it is also not recovering since then. According to the Global Gender Pay Gap Report 2022, it will take another 132 years, I'm repeating, 132 years to close the global gender pay gap. Can you imagine me in 132 years' time? I don't think that I will be still alive. Anyway, as the crises are compounding, the risk of global gender parity backsliding further intensifies. And there are many challenges Europe is facing. We tried of hearing that women's rights are a woman's only issue and that there are more pressing topics to discuss. What is more important and universal than the right of half of the population of human rights? We believe that a gender perspective is important wherever we look, and specifically in times of crisis and emergencies. First, because we need to avoid the disproportionate effect that women face. Second, because addressing women's rights must be a part of crisis solving, not an afterthought. And last but not least, because women need to be a part of these solutions. It's time. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was a huge wake-up call for Europe. A second wake-up call, it comes to migration. It brought millions of refugees, mostly women and children, to the EU and other countries. The gender component of wars and conflict is clear. Gender-based violence, risk of trafficking, and so many other factors affects women in conflict disproportionately. The situation of women in Afghanistan or Iran are also clear examples of why we need a feminist foreign policy, which many of government promotes. This also applies to the climate emergency, to COVID-19 pandemic, to economic crisis. We will hear about all of them and about how women and women's rights need to be a part of the solution to our world's challenges. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the discussions, and thank you all, my heart, for being here today, showing your commitment to women's rights. And now, I don't think that I need to introduce a long common fighter, our EU Commissioner for Equality, and a friend, a sister, Helena Dalli, to the podium. We are really delighted that you could make it today, and of course the floor is yours, so let's have equality together. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here in the Socialist and Democrat family, and thank you so much for inviting me, dear Zita, dear friends, especially in these difficult times with a wave of crisis and geopolitical turmoil. All of us, but especially women, are barely managing to recover. This is why we cannot allow slipbacks on gender equality. Difficult as it may be, we must turn the situation into an opportunity, fight back and set the tone for the future. We want a Europe where all women are financially independent, can lead, thrive, and be free, and where women and men have structural support and choices to organize their lives in a balanced way and lead decent lives. A Europe that understands that all skills, knowledge, and talents are needed to reinforce the care sector and to make the green and digital transition successful. And where no matter where one lives or which party is in government, fundamental rights are always safeguarded. But we see several pushbacks. Sex education, SRHR, and the recognition of gender are put into question across Europe by conservatives and the anti-gender movement. Roma women, lesbians, trans women, migrant women, and women with disabilities, amongst others, suffer from intersectional discrimination and marginalization to the point that some are pushed to the fringes of society. This must change. One of the biggest lessons we learned from the COVID-19 crisis is the importance and value of the care sector to our society. It is noteworthy that 90% of the formal care workforce is made up of women. Without structures and formal services set in place, informal care responsibilities quickly fall back on women's shoulders and recreate old imbalances at home and on the labor market, of course. Today, 7.7 million women are out of employment because of care responsibilities and a lack of support structures. Last month, the Commission published a strategy to reform the care sector. Part of our plan is to ensure that everyone has a real choice when combining private and professional life. For instance, the Commission proposed that 50% of children below the age of 3 would be in early childhood education and care, and 96% of children between the age of 3 and the starting age for compulsory primary education by 2030. The gender employment gap currently stands at 11%. To close it, we must make sure that women can participate in a meaningful way in the labor market. This is why, as part of the revision of the Barcelona targets, we introduced the notion of intensity and proposed 25 hours per week for children from 0 to 3 years and 35 hours per week for children between the age of 3 and 6. We also want member states to make additional commitments, such as closing the participation gap that still exists for children at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and promoting the inclusion of children from disadvantaged backgrounds, such as Roma children or children with disabilities or with special support needs. Women and men will be able to make professional choices and that are compatible with private life only if we can ensure that childcare services are affordable, accessible, and of high quality, of course. So while affordable, accessible, and good quality care services are essential for women's economic empowerment, financial independence, and work-life balance, so are parental leave schemes. Every member state should by now have transposed the EU Work-Life Balance Directive, adopted in 2019, although many have indeed not done so, and we are working on the next steps in this regard. The directive sets minimum standards for paternity, parental, and carers' leave. Most importantly, at least 2 months of parental leave must be adequately paid and cannot be transferred to the other parent. This is key to encourage the uptake of parental leave by fathers too, thereby making it easier for mothers to return to their jobs after a period of family leave. There are additional rights, such as the right to request flexible working arrangements, and these rules will facilitate the participation of women in the labor market as a result. Not only do I want to see more women enter and stay in the labor market, but I want women to be valued for their participation and contribution to society and the economy. This means making equal pay a reality for all, through the pay transparency proposal and through the strengthening of women's participation in all sectors and at all levels. The proposal for pay transparency will empower workers to enforce their right to equal pay and lead to an end to the gender bias in pay. The Women on Boards Directive proposal is expected to soon also become EU law and be transposed in EU member states. So talent and skills have no gender, and women's leadership matters. So we need to make sure that women benefit from the green and digital transition and enter the STEM fields. Women working in the care sector have decent working conditions, and women entrepreneurs are supported. For women to thrive and lead, they must also be free from violence. The Commission's proposal to combat violence against women and domestic violence will make a difference for all women across Europe. For the first time, we propose that rape is criminalized based on lack of consent, and FGM and cyber violence are criminalized. We want to strengthen victims' access to justice and the one-stop-shop mechanism in order to locate all support and protection services in the same place. We want to make sure that all women across Europe enjoy the same rights. As Europeans, we must show solidarity with women across the globe to defend their rights and even their lives. I think of women in Afghanistan, the Ukrainian women fighting back or fleeing conflict, and the Iranian women protesting on the streets. I also pay tribute to the Polish women and others fighting for equality and to protect the rights which they already have. So we must stand with all women that reclaim their space and their fundamental rights. No crisis is gender neutral, and no response should be gender blind. As a social democratic family and as a feminist movement, we need to seize the moment for women. We must fight back, stand up, and with courage, keep building a Europe of equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you to the three of you who already were speaking today, because the level of energy and dedication is way better than at male-dominated conferences. So it's quite a pleasure to be here. I'm Martin, a Berlin-based author and he for she catalyst for UN Women Germany, and I'm supporting the quest for gender equality by mobilizing and activating more men to join the fight. So I'm happy that I can at least see some men in the room, but a very warm welcome to all of you. It's really great to have you here. The upcoming 2 hours certainly promise to be interesting, enlightening, maybe also inspiring. And we have 2 expert panels. We have a great intervention with Katharina Barley and I think great closing remarks. You can actually raise questions during the panel. Katja was already elaborating a bit on it. You can use the tool and you can access it pretty easily if you scan this QR code right at the entrance. If you haven't done it, you can still do it. But there are also microphones there where you can raise your questions. So let's dive right in, and we try this out with the little mobile app and the poll. And maybe you open this app if you have it. And I would like to ask our technicians to show us the first question. And it is not an easy one, because the question is, what is, in your opinion, the biggest crisis/challenge for women at the moment? And you can choose among 4 options and what is most pressing. I know it's a little bit tricky and it's not really fair to only be allowed to pick one. And maybe it's hard for you to read it, but I will then read it out loud. So the 4 options are cost of living crisis or cost of living, it's gender-based violence and oppression, climate emergency, and mental health. Okay, and I think we can already see a pretty clear trend. So cost of living, this seems to be a really timely thing right now, but gender-based violence is definitely something that is very pressing for 36% of the people here in the room. So this gives us a little idea here in the beginning. But we want to reflect on these results now, but also dive deeper into the topic. And for that, I would love to welcome our first panel and the panelists here on stage. We are really, really happy that you made the way to Berlin. And we have actually also one of the panelists join online. So I would like to welcome Leticia. She's a policy analyst for gender equality at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. Welcome. Maybe you have a seat right here. And then we were already talking about Poland, about the fight for equality in Poland. So we're really happy to have you here, Ursula. She's international coordinator at the Foundation for Women and Family Planning. Thank you. And it's also quite a pleasure to have Anja here, Voisthoff, Federal Secretary of the DGB Women Germany. So that you have a little idea how this debate is structured, we will take, I think, approximately 45 minutes to talk here a bit, share ideas and perspectives, and then open up the panel for all of you. You can either use the microphone or you can already now put in questions through the app. You can also rate questions if you like some questions a lot. And then we will bring them back here to the panel. And the topic of the panel, of our first panel, is No Crisis is Gender Blind. And I want to give you a little introduction. So all crises, be it the war in Ukraine, be it climate change, the COVID pandemic, be it the law or rule of law crisis here in Europe, affect women and men differently. And women in most cases are disproportionately affected by these crises due to inequalities that already exist. So nevertheless, gender is rarely, if ever, taken into account in crisis response, in long-term planning, or in preventing planning, and often overlooked in media's reporting about these crises. Therefore, also some crises pass or are solved. The issue that women face are worse than before. So I'm really delighted that the three of you are joining us here today to talk a little bit about it, bring in your perspective and expertise, and that we get a little bit a better idea of where we are right now. What is the status quo? I would love to ask you first, Leticia. PES Women tends to say that no crisis is gender blind, so including the economic crisis or also the COVID crisis. And the EU's Recovery and Resilience Facility, so we all know it by Next Generation EU, is addressing this while also supporting the double transition into a more sustainable and just and digital world. And actually, in your work, you are looking how effective this measure is, and because the Next Generation EU program was also an opportunity to mainstream gender into national plans. So according to your research, did it work? Where do we still need to work? We're happy if you share some thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I would like to, first of all, also from the bottom of my heart, thank PES Women for making today possible, for the invitation. Oh, now there is the sound as well. And also basically to also state that it's so nice to actually be sitting physically with all of you, because I think we can probably share the feeling that we were all tired of sitting behind the screens. So this being said, so my name is Leticia Thyssen, and I'm delighted to represent FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies. And you will surely also be seeing many of my colleagues around during the PES Congress, be it at the stand, communicating about FEPS. So do make sure to reach out to us if you're interested about our work. But the reason why I'm here more specifically today is to speak about some of the findings of the research that we have been conducting in relation to the recovery funds. In fact, at FEPS, we have launched what we called the Recovery Watch project. And as the name is telling, the idea is to work as a sort of observatory, putting the finger on the social dimension of the recovery. And as such, it was impossible, of course, to forget the gender dimension. So to your question, was the recovery an opportunity to mainstream gender? I would say yes. Did the European Union seize it? I would say partly. And that is also some of the findings that we find when taking a close look, because eventually the COVID crisis has left lasting marks on our collective memories, on our personal experiences. It changed the way we work, the way we live, the way we interact with each other, but also the way that we actually see the place of care in our day-to-day lives. And so that is why we also wanted to ask, considering how much COVID-19 has disrupted and entrenched the pre-existing care crisis, whether and how the recovery plans, which is a groundbreaking instrument that was set up by the European Union precisely, and here I quote, to help repair the immediate socioeconomic damage brought about by COVID-19, actually, how does it address the care crisis here? And so the idea is basically to understand whether the stated aim of offering a response to the crisis has made the underlying care crisis, which has become undeniable, how does it effectively result in reforms and investment measures that are tackling this? And so politically, I think, yes, as many of the speeches are already attesting, there has been a rediscovery of the idea of care in political speeches. Care is being rediscovered despite the fact that it has always been there, but at least the advantages of COVID is that suddenly people realize that, yes, we all depend on care and we are all interdependent. We all have these images of press conferences where leaders were asking people and citizens to take care of themselves, to take care of others. But this was also visible in EU discourses. For instance, in the State of the Union speeches, where Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was also basically referring to care as an essential contribution to society, and where eventually this resulted in a clear commitment towards a care strategy that now has become a reality, as Commissioner for Equality has also just now presented to us. But again, like there are numerous examples where we saw, for instance, also European Council President stating that European values can only flourish in a caring societies. Those were their words. But now, how do we actually move from this political clapping to actual and concrete actions? And so that is why the recovery plans were actually so interesting to be looking at, because these are essentially the translation of these political commitments into concrete actions. Nevertheless, and here I see several European Parliament representatives, we know very well that the initial proposal that was put on the table was actually equality blind. And so that is also one of the main buzzwords here of the day. And so essentially what they were doing is that they were clearly disregarding the disproportionate impact on women by the crisis. So we started with the idea of tackling the crisis with the recovery, but the response that was offered was actually not even looking at women, because all the channels, all the investments were channeled into mainly male-dominated sector, disregarding the fact that women were the most hard hit. And this is not to mention the need to reconsider how the COVID crisis has exacerbated care workers' conditions, but also women's employment prospects. And so that is also why at FEPS we call for social rather than the physical, for investments in social rather than in physical infrastructures, heading also towards a care-led rather than construction-led recovery. And so here I would be perhaps asking Christina, who is somewhere in the room, to show some of the preliminary findings of the analysis that we have done of the national plans. So and you maybe, do not need
and maybe you can describe it, because I think not everyone can see it from there. So maybe you describe a bit what we can actually see, like from the...
So in fact, no worries, if you do not see the details of it, it's not that bad, because essentially the colors are already saying it all. Because what you see here is the analysis of 8 national recovery and resilience plans. So here there is a selection that was made of Belgium, Austria, Germany, Italy, Spain, Finland, Latvia, and Czech Republic. And what you see in orange are those measures that we have identified as care-focused measures. So that's the part in orange. The part in gray are those measures that sometimes have actually an impact on care, so be it either reforms or investments, but perhaps are not directly related, are not directly formulated in relation to care, but nevertheless have an influence. And then in blue, you see all the other measures. So I think what strikes to the eye here is that the place of care, despite it having been so much affected by the COVID-19 crisis, is actually occupying a very small place overall in the response that was provided across all the different member states. Nevertheless, what this graph is also showing is that there is a huge variation across the member states. Some are attributing a much higher share of their plans to care measures, while others are much more narrow. So we have the case, for instance, of Germany, where there is only one measure in the recovery plan that can be considered as care-focused. And whilst in Spain, for instance, we have the opposite example that has many, many more. Instead, the case of Austria is also interesting to be looking at, because despite the fact that it has a much smaller spending envelope and total share of measures, it still has proportionally a much higher share of overall measures dedicated to care. So that was just to give you a first glimpse of the analysis that was made here. Unfortunately, there's not the time to dig into this, but I think the four main elements that are to be remembered from this today is that, first of all, there is a huge variation in how care is addressed in the national plans, and that relies or is very much depending on the lack of top-down incentives provided by the European Union, as opposed to what was the case, for instance, for the green targets or the digital targets, where there were clear spending thresholds where 37% had to be dedicated to climate, 20-something% to digital, but we did not have this binding threshold for care. And so that is essentially one of the results. The second main finding is also that the proportion of care measures within the national plans is highly reliant on the pre-existing care regimes that were in place in the different countries. The third point is that despite the solutions that were offered within the plans tend to converge towards similar paths, so we see there is a general willingness to converge towards the institutionalization of childcare, the deinstitutionalization of long-term care, the underlying problems that are identified are done so in a very contrasting way. So in some cases, and Spain and Finland are quite striking in this regard, because there in the plans, care is identified as valuable for itself. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they are the only ones that have a chapter specifically dedicated to care in the national plans. And then you have other countries where care is still portrayed and framed as a burden. And the last element is that despite the fact that we see a pattern whereby indeed there is a tendency to move towards a more life cycle perspective to care, not all aspects of care are treated equally. So we see, for instance, there is a strong focus on childcare, there's a strong focus on long-term care, but none of the plans actually seriously address the inherently intersectional and cross-border nature of care. And that's, for instance, there is no single plan that is looking at the issue of domestic care. So voilà, I'm just putting these items, but I'm sure that this will feed our further discussion.
No, and I think it's so. No, thank you so much also for your important work, and I think it was worth it to dig a little bit deeper here, because we have like a tool on EU level that can be really powerful, but looking at the facts and figures, it isn't yet. So thank you also for your really important work. And when looking at mainstreaming gender into national plans, maybe, I don't know how successful Poland is or was, but we're really glad that you're here, Ursula, because in Poland we see a rule of law crisis. We see an attack on sexual and reproductive rights and also fundamental rights. And you have a vast experience in this area. Can you say something about this backtrack in Poland? How does it maybe also fit into the bigger picture of the backlash of women's rights we see worldwide? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work and how do you perceive the situation in Poland?
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for giving a space to me, who am representing the organization in Poland, which is responsible for protecting sexual and reproductive health and rights. So really, I'm very grateful for your willingness to hear this voice, because our struggle continues in Poland. You asked me about the link between the democracy crisis, the rule of law crisis, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. I think that
this link is evident. Poland, for over 30 years, has been having a very restrictive anti-abortion law. But in the last years, 2 years ago, to be precise, the institution that is lacking necessary guarantees to be considered as the one that fulfills the requirements for a democratic institution stripped us out farther of one ground for access to abortion. That was possible precisely because of this rule of law crisis and the deficient democracy in Poland. That is what we also stressing very much in our advocacy when we talk to EU decision makers, that had we had the rule of law in Poland, our still very imperfect law on access to abortion had been intact. So that's why I think it's very important for the EU leaders and decision makers to see that link and to make sure that within the scrutiny of Poland, under the rule of law, the women's rights, and especially sexual and reproductive rights, are not overlooked. Because they do have incredible impact on our lives. As you might have been aware, there are many cases of women who have died as a result of this restrictive abortion, anti-abortion law in Poland. And when it comes to seeing that what countries that do, I mean, I always see the countries that are mixing up with abortion laws, that the countries that the states that try to restrict the laws, they always have deficits. Because as we see on the example of Poland, the society is in favor of the right to abortion. Similarly, in the US, the society is in favor of the abortion law. And still, the state is going against the democratic will of people. And it's happening in many countries at that moment. You wanted also to hear about some good practices and something that has been achieved in that difficult period.
Yeah, maybe because it would be really interesting. You were like talking or spreading a message to EU leaders or people that have influence on the EU level, but like on the ground in your country, if there's a majority not in favor of that policy, like how is it? So what's going on? Like. In Poland, is there resistance? Are there movements that are creating pressure to change things?
There is an incredible resistance following the introduction of this restrictive law. Really, entire Poland was on the streets. The movement has consolidated. There are numerous organizations that, like Federa, and there are also a few other organizations that are active in the field to make sure, especially in the field of sexual and reproductive health and rights, access to abortion. We really do make sure every day that every woman is assisted in getting access to abortion, in getting access to information on how to get abortion. We risk our lives, we risk our safety. For example, tomorrow there is a criminal case of an activist who helped in abortion, because abortion is still criminalized. And that's why when I was starting my intervention, I really thanked you for giving this voice, because this voice of Polish women needs to be heard now. I know that now politically the situation is difficult, but we really do believe that with this support, with this revolutionization of the society that we achieved over these years, the change will happen. Sooner or later it will happen, because now there are 70% of people in favor of this change, while it has been 20 less a few years ago. So this is an incredible change. And also, there is another achievement that needs to be mentioned in this context, which is that we will never go back to the compromise, so-called Polish compromise on abortion. Abortion, if the change happens, it has to happen for real.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this insight and also the energy you bring into this topic. Right next to you, there is Anja. For all those who don't speak German, she will answer in German, so maybe you use your translation devices. But I will ask the question in English. Anja, women are not only doing a major share of the care work, they are also really affected strongly by shocks we are seeing in the labor market. And now looking into this winter, this might be a really tough winter, also economically. So how do you think things were evolving since 2020, also since the pandemic, also in the labor market? And now looking ahead, seeing the rising costs of living, the energy crisis, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's like a major thing a lot of women are, like we all as a society, but especially also women, are struggling with.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Frage und vor allem vielen Dank für die Einladung hier.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question and thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. Thank you so much to the Polish lady who just gave us an insight into the debate. And we don't have that kind of situation. Thank God we don't have that kind of situation in Germany. And I can only say we wish you the best of success in all your strivings for a better situation for women in Poland.
Aus dem Krisenmodus nicht heraus.
All right, we simply don't get out of a crisis mode because we went through the pandemic, the energy crisis, the inflation is hitting us, and you have to distinguish what the effect on women is. But for all of these crises, what you can say is the inequality in the labor market and also in other aspects of society, the disequality has increased to the detriment of women, and that is on the increase. So worse access to the labor market. The pension plans are not as good for women as for men, and those who are in a better shape, they get through this crisis in a better way. So in a moment like that, it is always to the detriment of women. So in crisis modus, yes, we are facing this situation. And in the pandemic, we have seen in Germany, those who were working part-time, the young mothers, they are in a worse situation before because the daycare centers, the kindergartens were closed, the schools were closed. And that led to the fact that women had a double whammy because they had to take care of the children and of the elderly. Some women actually had to leave their job completely, and it is difficult for women to get back into their job because the economic situation is not very rosy at the moment, and of course the economy has also suffered. Which means that right now in Germany we have an increase of the basic salary. The minimum wage has been increased, and some of the gender disequalities have been eliminated. But other effects are so high that the pay gap in Germany, which is at 18%, will not really become smaller. And another point of the crisis is many people suffered from short work during the crisis, especially at the beginning of the crisis. And the state is not actually taking into account the differences between the individual industrial sectors. As somebody from the trade union, it is great, and I see that it's great, that it's good, that people can be sent home but still get their unemployment payment, which of course is only 2/3 of their last paycheck, which is based on their net worth. So women at 67% then even have less money, and they are in the tax bracket number 5, which is where you have the biggest gap between gross and net in your paycheck. So they also get less money in short work. Short work is a great labor instrument, but it unfortunately discriminates between men and women, and therefore for women it has a negative effect. On top of that, in many areas, in many fields, we had collective agreements where short work payment has been raised. That happened mostly in the area where you have male-dominated fields. They have good collective bargaining agreements, but women who are not in those sectors do not benefit from the increase of the short work payments. And now when we're talking about a recession, these problems, when it comes to payment for short work, will probably become even more intense. And I can only agree with what we just heard from the EU level. There were packages for the economic development, but when we, whatever has been agreed for the care field, I mean, that was not very much. It was hardly there on the agenda, and I can only say that many packages have been approved, but the majority of these measures that have a direct benefit for individuals, half of them were equal for men and women, but the other half, that distinguish it between the genders, there 40% was geared towards men and only 20% towards women. And if you look at the amount of measures or the volume of the measures, then it's even worse, because the volume that went to men was bigger than what women received. And when you look at what measures were good to have employment effects or to create new jobs after the crisis, you have to say that 82% of the money that was used was for male-dominated sectors and only 2%, 32% for women. So it only underpins what you just showed us a minute ago in your chart. Now, when we're looking for solutions, because we're basically almost in the next question. Let me interrupt you for a second.
We will really get to the solution part quite soon. I think it was first also really important to get like a picture, where are we right now, what's the status quo. We will get to the solution. But I would now really love to also include Heather into the discussion. She's joining us digitally, and here you are. Hello. Really nice to have you. We can see and hear you. Yes. So you're the Associate Director of Women's Rights Division at Human Rights Watch. Thank you for being with us. And at Human Rights Watch, you are working extensively on women's rights around the globe, and also having an eye on the situation in Afghanistan, the rising tensions within Iran, the situation in Ukraine. And we see that in those countries, economic, climate crisis, and authoritarian regimes are both affecting women and girls disproportionately. And can you explain a little bit, or tell us a little bit more about this link between living with or under an oppressive regime and women's rights, and maybe what we can also learn from that not relationship, but connection.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for inviting me in. I'm sorry to be on a TV screen rather than there in person with you. This is a really important topic, and I think we've all been gripped by seeing the scenes of women in Iran on the streets, but I appreciated so much the comments from Ursula earlier, because it's not only in Iran that women are risking their lives to fight back against authoritarian regimes. Women's rights, attacking women's rights, often along with LGBT rights, has been a favorite tactic of authoritarian leaders in a growing number of countries. And this is a risk that we all need to be very mindful of. And we need to be mindful of the fact that this is happening in Europe as well as in countries and regions across the world. Authoritarian leaders often see attacks on women's rights, on feminism, on access to abortion, on trans rights as being ways to kind of signal what they refer to as traditional family values. And this is very, very dangerous for a majority of the people. If we add together 50% of women and people who are marginalized because of sexual orientation, gender identity, we're the majority of the population in every country. But this rhetoric is powerful. It's a powerful weapon against us, and we have to find our own messaging to fight back. And the women's movements are a threat to authoritarian leaders. We see that in many countries. Peaceful protest movements, peaceful resistance is led by women, and not solely on women's rights issues, but across the board. I mean, it's interesting. I've been following Afghanistan very closely, in particular in the last 14 months since the Taliban took over the country again, and women started protesting there within 3 days of the Taliban takeover. And their slogan is "Bread, Work, Freedom." It's not bread for women and work for women and freedom. It's bread for everyone, because the whole population is in very dire humanitarian straits at the moment. So I think the question for activists and for politicians is, how do we support these movements? How are we able to be in solidarity with these movements in all of the many places where they need our solidarity? Thank you so much.
Heather. Thank you so much. Maybe we quickly dive a little bit deeper, because you were asking for solidarity, and we've seen, I think, MEPs showing signs in front of the European Parliament. We've seen first reactions, for example, of the German government towards women in Iran. But is this enough? How can be solidarity expressed in the most effective way? And do we need more of that? Do we have to be more courageous even in showing solidarity, and also maybe agreeing on more tough measures?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. Yes, no, we're not doing anywhere near enough. And certainly we can point to individual politicians, individual members of the European Parliament, of governments who are really trying their best, but we need to be both more outspoken and more sophisticated. We have to carry placards and march in the streets, and we also have to understand how the Security Council works and how the Human Rights Council works and what can be done in those venues. One thing I'm particularly frustrated about at the moment is that the Human Rights Council session just ended, and the European Union was in the lead on Afghanistan, and they did very, very little. My organization was one of 22 organizations that wrote to the EU saying that what's needed in Afghanistan right now, given the scale of the human rights violations that's happening, is a new UN-mandated accountability mechanism. And the EU just refused to even put that forward. And what we've ended up with instead is some pretty minor tinkering with the mandate of the special rapporteur that already exists. And that's a 4-person team led by a volunteer to try and address the human rights situation in a country where 50% of the population has had most of their rights stripped away. So I guess my answer to you is that we have to go far beyond statements of deep concern, and that's often all that we get. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. So you might have recognized we're already a little bit on the solution track, what can be done. And also, Leticia, therefore, I really also want to ask you, you shared those slides showing us, like black on white or in color, that we aren't there, that we aren't at the point where we should be. So when it comes to promoting gender mainstreaming, when it comes to feminist economy also at the EU level, what can we do? What should we do more?
With a microphone is always better to make our voices heard. But first of all, to answer your question, I think the most crucial point is to actually acknowledge that crises and the responses to them are gendered. And so in that state, every stage can generate gendered consequences, and that the response that we are giving to any crisis is building on gendered assumptions about society and about the economy. And so in this sense, perhaps I would like also to build on some of the recent research that has been conducted in feminist research, more specifically in EU politics, and more particularly Maureen O'Dwyer, whose work I can only recommend, because she's making very useful parallels between the 2008 financial global crisis and the COVID-19 crisis, which now is further continuing into the cost of living crisis. So we are not all these multiple crises, but what she's showing is that in a way they are simultaneously very similar and different at the same time, but they also offer us useful insights to take lessons from that. And the first similarity, of course, is the fact that there is a gender distribution of the adjustments. So we see that, for instance, we saw that back in 2008, 2010 years, male-dominated sectors were the first ones to be impacted through construction, manufacturing sectors, but nevertheless, as a result of the austerity measures, and because of the high concentration of women in public sector, they were the ones to actually suffer the long-term consequences of it. And here again, although it's true now and it's widely acknowledged that women have been the first ones to be confronted with the direct and immediate consequences of the crisis, men, of course, were also affected when the sectors were closed, but nevertheless, women are again faced with the long-term consequences when it comes to the impact of the labor market, and that is not to mention the different examples also that were mentioned by my co-panelists when it comes to women's increased participation in part-time work. That is always also raising the question: what is the real choice in that decision to reduce working time? And not to mention also the documented impact of the increase of telework that is now becoming the new norm and that is having heavy impact on gender imbalances. The second similarity that we can see between both crises that we had back in 2008 and the one that we are facing now is this emphasis, at least on EU level, on oversight and recommendation. Because as a result and as a response to the crisis, back then there was an effort by the European Union to introduce a sort of post-crisis governance framework, and most particularly through the European semester, which would also require member states to submit budget plans and to engage in annual cycles of recommendations and oversight. Now, this time around with the recovery plans, what we see in the response, and also which is connected very much with the EU budget, is that the EU is establishing this Next Generation EU Fund to support member states, and where the RRF, so the Recovery Resilience Facility, is issuing loans and grants to member states, but on the condition that these plans, that these national action plans, are also being submitted and approved by the European Commission. So here again, even though the European semester has been put on hold during the pandemic, there is an important governing logic that is based strongly on oversight and recommendation. So what's important to remember is that crises are gendered, but, and I think here we are all, if we are all sitting in this room, I think we know this fact, but the problem is that it is not guaranteed that policymakers will will take this into account. And so here feminist economists have very much highlighted the male biases within policy making that both serve to obscure the gendered impacts of economic shocks, but also that lead to policies that further exacerbate and entrench them. And so here in this regard, it's also a matter of framing. How do we frame the different crises? I think here easy connections can be made also with issues related to SIHR, can also be made with how we frame the importance of the ecological transformation. Because many times you also hear the argument, yes, gendered have not been prioritized because we need to focus on the green and digital transition. But we should not also forget within this debate that without the care industry, without the tourism industry, where we will have a high concentration of women, there is not going to be a just transition. So speaking of the environment without speaking of the gendered impacts and consequences just is not gonna happen. And of course, here it's a matter of representation. So the fact that in both crises we saw that there is a heavy underrepresentation in decision makers that where women does impact eventually the final output. But to come back to the issue of gender mainstreaming, which was basically to bring some sort of gender sensitive analysis into all policy processes at EU level. We see that there's also here somehow some sort of a mixed feeling about it, because it has been adopted already now more than 2 decades ago, and yet we don't see it happening. Why? Well, because it is also highly dependent on political will and commitment. And for this to be effective, gender mainstreaming needs to be applied where there is also the will to do so.
You really hit the point now with the last 2 sentences, political will. Do you see, do we also need more men to see that this is really important and support this? Because you just hit the point with the last 2 sentences. And who is in power right now? It's often men taking the decisions, and they're maybe not seriously dealing and pushing gender mainstreaming forward, aren't they?
I think what we need more than having men or women in politics is to have feminist policies.
Really good point. And maybe also more male leaders understanding that it's like good for all of us, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so many times also in this debate, I think what's important also, and also perhaps to bring it back to the recovery plans, what's important is not to ask why there is no gender equality, but to actually ask where and how this discussion around gender equality is taking place. And so in that sense, I think it's really important to stress, and I cannot underscore it often enough, that eventually we need to understand that gender equality should not be incorporated into economic policy, but we have to realize that economic policy is by default highly gendered, but the real question is it contributing to increasing or decreasing gender inequalities?
Thank you a lot. So you see, we're actually jumping like from one crisis to the other, and we don't have enough time for all crises. That's pretty sad. But we are now in this solution part, and a development we're seeing right in the country next to us, Poland, who took over so much responsibility for people from Ukraine. We see a growing discussion on migration again, and also on like all those impacts that are coming with migration, but also the gendered impact of the war in Ukraine and its consequences. And in Poland, I mean, when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, we heard of risk of human trafficking, we heard of also the lack of sexual and reproductive health, the rights of refugees, and at the same time we saw that Poland and its civil society did an incredible job, and I think they're still doing. Can actually this be sort of a blueprint? Can we learn from it, from the parts that were going well? And maybe what can we also learn from the things that weren't going so well?
Yes, indeed, that's an example. Ukrainian humanitarian crisis resulting from the war that is happening right now in Ukraine, but that has an impact in Poland, is highly gendered by the nature by the very nature of it. Since 24th of February, there were 7 million of people transiting through Poland and almost 2 million who have stayed. That is a huge number. And 90% of that number, more or less, of course, those are approximate, approximate estimations, but still 90% of that are women and children. So by the very nature of the crisis, the crisis is very gendered. And I think that when it comes to how the Polish, how Poland dealt with the crisis, we need to make a distinction between the Polish people, Polish civil society, and the Polish state. Because first of all, the Polish society, I think, impressively reacted in the first days, first weeks, and continues the very accommodating approach towards Ukrainian refugees. So we literally opened our hearts, our doors, and we really made this crisis a bit different, because there are like many people staying in the houses of Poles rather than in very few reception centers that are now in Poland. Of course, they are needed, they are there, but compared to the number of people coming, the needs are being met by the society. Polish organizations, again, they just organize themselves perfectly. I will come to a SRHR dimension of the response, but really, I mean, on every aspect of the response, I think that the NGOs, they just did what they could without, and that's where I'm coming to the role of the state, because we actually created a bit of a parallel system, and the NGOs reacted to what has been going on by getting funds, receiving lots of funds from humanitarian organizations that are present right now in Poland, but without any help of the state. So in this, I think that what the state has done is that just following the temporary protection of the EU regulation, it made Ukrainian refugees having access to all the services on the comparable level as Poles. But that what has happened is that we just saw how the system is deficient, how much we cannot count on the system. And here I will go to SRHR, because as I have mentioned, in Poland there is nearly no access to abortion. Even abortion following a sexual assault requires certificate from the prosecutor. These abortions, they do not happen legally in Poland. Then, in order to get a contraception, including emergency contraception, there is a prescription from the doctor required. To get a simple gynecological consultation, it is also difficult, because very often to get the appointment from the gynecologist, we have to wait months. So taking the systematic challenges that already us as Polish women we are experiencing, to put on top of that women who are with children, who are coming in the very distressing situation to this country that is already so deficient, and putting on top of that all that level of distress of what they went through maybe before coming, and the insecurities and the situation that just results, that is directed, the consequence from the war, altogether it makes the condition in which they find themselves very, very challenging. So that's why I think that on one side, Polish society, Polish organizations did all that they could. For example, at FEDEA, we straight away, we were aware, we were anticipating that women will not know even what the situation is. So we made sure that the information on the situation in Poland, on the legal state of play, is accessible to them. We made sure that they would know where to turn if they need help in getting access to gynecologists, in getting access to contraception, to abortion. So really, they got all the information and all the support they needed from us. And again, I'm just underlying that the state in that was not present, and we couldn't count on its support. So in that mobilization aspect, of course, it can be seen as a blueprint, as a pattern of reacting, but really we need a state to be, to have a bag, to have a financial, structural support of the state to be more effective.
Thank you a lot. I mean, following up on that, I really directly want to jump to Heather first, because we were now just hearing about the power of civil society and what is possible if there's the demand to react quickly. And we saw really rapid changes in Afghanistan, a discussion that is like off the radar sort of in global media at the moment. Looking at the situation in Afghanistan, where do you see the role of women's movements, and also what can, like maybe also the role of women's movement, of civil society right now, and what can be done concretely to support these movement and this work on the ground in Afghanistan?
Thanks so much. I mean, I've talked already a little bit about the courage of the protesters. Protesters have been beaten, pepper sprayed, electric shocked by Taliban officials, followed home, harassed in their homes, detained, forced into false confessions. Their families have been threatened that their property will be confiscated if the women don't stop their protesting. So, you know, we see people dying on the streets of Iran to protest against that government's oppression, and the risks are pretty similar in Afghanistan as well. As you said, Afghanistan, I think, highlights for us how fragile women's rights can be anywhere. If this can happen in Afghanistan, if a group can essentially cancel all women's rights more or less overnight, and the response from the world is, you know, sort of deep concern and not much more, then how safe are any of us, and how fragile are our rights everywhere? There's an interesting academic, her name's Karima Benoon, she's a former special rapporteur on culture, who's written that it's time for us to use the term gender apartheid to talk about Afghanistan, and that if we use that term, then apartheid, as you know, is a recognized concept in international law, and it requires specific responses from the international community as a whole and from other countries. And I think that's a really powerful argument that we need to think about, and it may be applicable beyond Afghanistan as well, but Afghanistan is the right place to sort of take that term out and start thinking about how we use it. I think, you know, the international response has been really inadequate. I've talked about that already. And one of the things that's of particular frustration to me is, you know, I think it's a really positive thing that we have more and more countries that say that they have a feminist foreign policy. And many of the countries that have been leaders in adopting a feminist foreign policy are countries that were deeply involved in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Canada, Germany, France, Sweden were all countries that had troops in Afghanistan and are some of the first countries to say that they have a feminist foreign policy. We haven't been seeing the leadership that we need from those countries on Afghanistan, and we need them to recognize that Afghanistan represents a global threat to women's rights and requires a response from those countries individually and collectively. And if that kind of leadership isn't on offer from countries that say that they have a feminist foreign policy at this moment of crisis, then it really does begin to beg the question of what it actually means to have a feminist foreign policy. Thanks a lot.
These were really good points, Heather, and I wrote down gender apartheid. Maybe that's a term and a concept we can take as a takeaway, and it's really food for thought. Thank you a lot, Heather. And maybe before we get to the question part, I would like to ask you, Anja, because I stopped you when you wanted to start talking about solutions. We have those multiple crises, the COVID crisis, and now the energy crisis, and like how to get through there. And also, when a lot of women are stuck in part-time, they aren't there in leading or in leader positions. So this plays, I think, also into it, then who's like taking decisions. But yeah, maybe following up on what you were elaborating before, what are like solutions that should be pushed forward more powerfully?
Ja, ich kann dann deine Frage anschließen. Und ich glaube,
Okay, yes, I follow up on your question. I think there's a double strategy that we have to go
an vielen
for.
Stellen brauchen, das greift Dinge auf, die Heather und Letizia schon
Many of the things that Heather and Letizia pointed out are
mehr
true.
Frauen in
We
Führungspositionen.
need more women in leadership
Wenn
positions.
wenn ich jetzt nicht auf die Politik gucke, sondern auf
Even
die
if I
Wirtschaft.
don't look at politics, if I look in the field of finance and business, we need them everywhere, not only on boards, as CEOs, but at all levels, women have to be in top positions so that they can
Führung auch
be
in Teilzeit
independent.
gehen.
And then, of course, leadership positions doesn't mean that you cannot work part-time. So where women are not represented, the perspective of women are not shown. And mixed teams are always more successful in every field, politically as well as in the field of business. There are many studies that show that women have to be in places where their perspective is lacking, where their point of view is not there. So when you have countries where you have quotas for women, things do work. In Germany, we had this major discussion when we had the quota for supervisory boards and governing boards because they said that there are not enough women. But the point was that was no problem at all finding women for these positions. Of course, some of them, in some companies they had to look a little bit harder. But so far, there's not a single post for a CEO or a CFO that has not been filled because of a lack of women. Women have to be represented everywhere, not only at the top level, but at all levels. That's one part, which is part of my strategy. But the double strategy has a second part to it. Even if we have representation of women by law or incentives, we still need what we call a feminist economic policy, a foreign policy from a feminist angle, and so on. So we need a way to approach politics at all decision levels that take into account the fact that the experience of life for men and women are different, that their experiences are completely distinct. And then when you have guidelines, when you have projects, what is the effect for women? What is it for men? This is about budgets. This is about economic policy for any political project that you are starting. And with this double strategy, it will work. So representation of women has to be strengthened, and you have to have gender neutrality in all aspects of politics. And wherever those things have not been taken into account, well, that has to be improved then.
Thank you a lot, Anja, for this double strategy, die Doppelstrategie. I would now like to open the floor to your questions. We received some online, but there are also microphones there, and you're invited to stand up, raise a question or a precious thought. But before maybe someone has the courage to stand up, I would like to bring in a really important point. The commissioner was talking about the care gap. And here is a very good question by Gisela. So how can we ensure that unpaid care work, it's roughly 90 minutes a day in Germany that women are doing that more than men, mostly done by women, is taken into account in the national pension schemes? Does anyone have an idea how to, if not, maybe Anya or?
Maybe just an interesting insight, actually, because of course, this is a very complex issue, and there's no one answer to this big challenge. But what's interesting to see is that in some national recovery plans, the member states actually identify a maternity add-on, and that is, for instance, the case of Spain. Austria and Belgium also intends to introduce what they call a gender test. And the idea here within these reform plans that are outlined is to basically compensate for the time that women have spent, and here specifically on maternity leave, so that is also one form of unpaid care, to compensate this on their later pension contribution, specifically for the time that they have spent outside of the labor market, and therefore accounting also for the fact that they are often penalized because of these unpaid care duties.
Thank you a lot, and maybe quickly, Anja.
Also was wir in Deutschland haben, sind die...
Well, what we have in Germany are those substitute payments for maternity and also maternity leave, and you get benefit points for your pension scheme. The government is working on a special payment for care. It was part of the coalition agreement. They haven't done it yet, but I hope they will get their act together soon, because they need to include that too in payment for women. And for the time that people have been taking care of the elderly without getting paid for it, that is already included in our pension schemes, which is good. But we need more of that in the entire biography of women, so they can take time off and still be taken care of. And they need to be paid for the time that they have taken care of the elderly. We have to show that men and women both make contributions, but of course the jobs are differently distributed throughout the life, and we need to have breathing, working times, very fluid in the approach, and not more time that is being secured for your pension plan when you're not working. That is not good. But what we need is that the time that when women were taking care of the elderly or of children, that is benefiting them in their pension schemes.
First question. Hello. Who are you and what is your
I
thought?
introduce myself. I'm Irina Angerman from the Netherlands. And I became a conscious feminist in 1979 when there were no he for she supporting us. In 1979, I became first a feminist and later on a social democrat. And my question is, now we are, if Letitia Thyssen has also researched the national recovery plans on the issue of digitalization, because now I'm personally engaged in preparing for the Commission on the Status of Women 67 next year, and it's about digitalization. And I read in the feminist news of the European Women's Lobby, she's here, Monday, that girls girls have no, there is a gender gap in users from 2013 to 2019. It's not even 20%. And I became a digital migrant in 1996. So my question is, did you research that too in the national recovery plans?
So I think this was a direct. Letitia, yes. Please. Thank you a lot.
The very straight straightforward answer is actually no, because we made the conscious decision to focus specifically on care measures. And so, for instance, I'm also aware that, for instance, it would have been interesting to understand how gender-based violence is addressed in the plans, because we know that some plans also address it. This is particularly also the case. I know that there are some Belgians in the room, Belgium, that is putting at disposal social housing for victims of violence. But so we do not address that aspect, although as part of the larger FEPS Recovery Watch project, there is the intention to actually then take it a step forward and have one policy study that would then be looking at the gender mainstreaming of both climate and the digital components of the recovery.
Thank you a lot. I think our next question is up front. I think you raised your, and maybe you can go to the microphone. Thank you a lot.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I think it works.
Thank you so much. I'm Zefi Dimada, I'm Vice President of PES Women. I'm from Greece. I'm also a lecturer in Pantheon University. And I'd like to highlight in two very important issues. We have to concentrate more in the issues of finance. When we talk about gender equality, it's not just policies and measures and kind words. We need to pay. We need to have, we say female budget or women budget or gender budget. We need to work and to have more women and more finance women in the development and in the developing countries to work in different issues. We have a very important research in our university about the climate crisis and women, and the results are really bad for women. It's sad that more women in a different way affected from the climate crisis in their health, in the issues of work. They have effects of losing their words and need to change what they do for many, many years instead of men. And of course, as PES, and because we are a socialist party here, we need to focus on the far rights. In Europe, we have increasing of the far rights like something usual, something that is political correct, let's say. And this is the first thing that we are going to hit the human rights and the women's rights. And we have, of course, the abortion, but it's not only abortion the issue. It's the issue that we need more children, and this is related only for women, and with women. Women have to go back to their house because we need more children, because they take the jobs from the men, and we cannot close our eyes to the conservatives and especially to their far rights that coming and just shaking their hands and their finger to all of us, and especially to women, go back to your home. This is something we need to focus on. Thank you so much.
So this was more a call to action than a question, but it was a very important call to action. So thank you a lot for that, and thank you for this perspective from Greece and your work. I would now like to bring in you right here at the microphone. Maybe you can introduce yourself and
Piero Catelli, Honorary President of Socialist International Women, former European Member of Parliament and Italian Parliament. I would like to make a reflection of what the representative of Human Rights Watch said about women's appetite. I find that these are strong words, and we need strong words to synthesize strong situation. And I invite all of us to use women's appetite, because it's the best way to represent surely the situation in Afghanistan. It's so evident, but we can add to Afghanistan other situations in so other countries. And if we learn to speak of women's appetite, strong words, I think that our message would be much stronger. This is one recommendation. Second, it's an expression of disillusion. I'm so sorry that the EU in the Human Rights Council was shy in supporting the proposal. Really, and I feel uneasy because I have attended, I think, 25 sessions of the Commission of the Status of Women at United Nations, and always the EU delegation was on the forefront on these issues. And discovering, I would have never thought that this would happen, and I think that all of us have to put pressure on our institutions. We have 9 commissioners. We have not very many, but some governments in Europe led by socialists, and we shouldn't run the risk to find another time in this situation, EU being shy on human rights. Third recommendation, it's a warm recommendation to Letitia. You know, Letitia, that I esteem you a lot and I'm fond of what you are doing, but be cautious with the words. You say it's not important, women or men. The important is feminist policies. True, but we have struggled so much to have women at the decision-making level. So it is important to have women, and we want gender-balanced institutions, but we also need men, because I think we've been rather cute in elaborating, but sometimes our policies need help to be implemented. So we also need men, and so we have to join forces. And if we find more men, I think that feminist policies will be much more powerful. That's all.
Before we do a little closing round, because we only have 5 minutes left, I would love to include both of you and you that were pointing, and maybe you keep it really short and precise, and then we
stick to the point. Yeah. And I know how to network with the sisters afterwards. Thank you, Rhonda Donaghy, PES Women's Executive, and from the opening today, when Alinda Daly spoke about people working or living in the hidden, and equality for people who aren't even on the scale of what a crisis is. I reminded myself again of what the actually dictionary meaning of the word crisis is. It's a time of intense difficulty and danger. And if you're a woman, more than likely with children, living in the hidden economy in any of our big cities, which we all proudly live in, I can't even bear to think of what a crisis is like for them. And if we are speaking with courage for all women, we have to look at ways at regularising processes so these women can hold their hands up and register their children for schools, for hospitals, for education, the things that will really, really change them. And a lot of that was alluded to later on. And while we talk about an intense difficulty and danger, Ursula, thank you so much for your presentation on Poland. As an Irish woman, I know too well, unfortunately, the struggle that our sisters in Poland are in. I don't think it resonates with people. For the pro-life campaigns and for those institutions that unashamedly give money to organisations to work on the ground against us, they don't care about life, because they don't care about life after that child is born, and they don't care when women die. We can go through every country, a country as small as ours, and rattle off women's names, but we're not going to do that, because that's way too emotive. We have to actually kick this to the curb on this one. Stop allowing right-wing governments tinker around with our bodily autonomy. We fought too hard for it. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. I will represent myself. My name is Esmeralda Naji. I come from Palestine. And I would like to go back to the question of apartheid. While we strongly condemned all violations of women's rights across the world, and most particularly violations of the right of Ukrainian women in all the context of the war on Ukraine, we remind the world from this room that violations of the rights of the Palestinian people, and especially Palestinian women, have condemned unabated for over 74 years. I think it's enough of double standards treatment. And my question is, isn't it time to put an end to the longest occupation of modern history here? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm Julie Ward. I was a member of the European Parliament for 5.5 years on the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee. And I saw many actions with many of my friends here today, and I'm so proud of what we did together, and we're still in that fight, and it's quite clear we're still in that fight. Our rights are being rowed back right across the world. Also in UK, I have to say, with our horrendous right-wing Conservative government. I was prompted to get up and speak because we were talking about the kind of men in women's spaces kind of conversation. And, you know, I'm very grateful to all the men who stand with us. And there is a model that we could look to, which is co-chairs. So if you have never been to Rojava in Kurdistan, I've been to Rojava in Kurdistan. They have a fantastic system of co-chairing. They also have this in the HDP in Turkey, where if an HDP man gets elected, he shares it with a woman. And we should be taking up that model. Why should it be either or? We could have co-chairs in our own democratic institutions. And just look what happens when you make that space available to both people working together. It is really, really inspiring. And I would urge any of you, if you've never been to Rojava, go. It is an incredible experience.
Oh, now we do one more, and then we do it really quick. Oh, God. You're really talkative. That's really great.
I know that she is coming from the other way. We finally are given a voice.
Hello, welcome.
Hallo, mein Name ist Felek Nasuka.
Hello, my name is Philip Nasuka, and I'm the
der
foreign
HDP-Fraktion
policy
im türkischen Parlament.
speaker in the Turkish parliament of the HDP
Sellerin.
parliamentary group. I was born in Celle, actually.
Das
Julia
System der Großvorsitzenden
just explained the system of co-chairs.
Ich gehöre zu der drittgrößten Fraktion im
one of the third largest parliamentary group in the Turkish
eine
parliament.
Partei über 6,5 Millionen Wählerstimmen hatte, die aber jetzt verboten werden soll. Wir sind in einem Verbotsverfahren.
To become illegal.
Die HDP
So that
sitzt
currently the HDP is made
Wir sind eine Frauenpartei.
We are actually a party for women. We are a women's party. We have a women's council. We have a group for women, the first in the Turkish history.
Wir sind die einzigste Fraktion im türkischen
We are the only
Parlament.
parliamentary group in the Turkish parliament that has a women's group. Members of parliament of HDP that have come together as a parliamentary group. So we have once per month a session and we discuss women's topics.
Innerhalb der Partei aufgebaut,
system we actually established within the party, so as to not just talk about quotas, because we say we are more than just quotas, and we have a say. And if we have a say, then we should also make our voices heard within politics, because politics, this is not just men's business, it's also women's business. And we should be
als Frauenrat
should enjoy the same rights, and we as Women's Council decide who should be put up as a candidate. Not men take a decision who should be put forward as a candidate for co-chair. No, we do that. And this is something that is good for the future, for all bodies in all parliaments. We started it, and therefore we are under attack. But we try to stand firm, and we keep on saying, despite all the repression, we stand for equal opportunities as HDP, and therefore with the Women's Council, the co-chairs in all working areas, we as co-chairs are active, and we are continuing to work that. Yeah.
So I hope you all wrote down co-chairs. That's another key concept. I really got the sign that I can't let every one of you talk again. But we now have a coffee break, and I want to invite you to reach out to our great experts and get in touch with them. You can also Google their names, write them emails. They might respond. I really want to say thank you that you joined us here today. We now have a coffee break, and let's keep continuing having the conversation. Thank you a lot. Oh, sorry.
Ja, bitte sehr.
I will speak in German. Please put your headset on the head. I think it's good to speak my mother language in my mother country. Herzlich willkommen. Herzlich willkommen.
Welcome. Once again to the Willy Brandt House in Berlin.
SPD-Frauen. Hier das Logo, die Frauen der SPD in Deutschland.
PES women in Germany. 140,000 women are part of ASF. I think this is something that is really great.
Was wir nicht sind.
What we are not. We are not a work group on feminism. Some people tend to believe that. A small working group that is just focusing on one topic. No, we are the SPD, Social Democrat women. We are organized in one political party,
Themen eine Antwort. Nicht nur für Themen, die scheinbare Frauenthemen sind.
We want a lot of topics that need to be covered, and this also is gender mainstream.
Partei heißt, dass die Frauenorganisationen nicht nur für die scheinbaren Frauenthemen zuständig sind.
Not only responsible for these just women's topics, but for everything. Ulrike Hefner, I want to introduce next my co-chair, because we are the ones that head the ASF, and we try to make Germany and Europe a little bit better every day.
Sind Krisen genderblind?
Are crises genderblind?
Wirtschaftskrise momentan, weniger Geld im Geldbeutel. Es geht die Energiekrise.
Less money in our pockets. It's about the energy crisis. It's about the care gap. I think one crisis has not even been mentioned. It's the democracy
Wir haben eine
crisis.
ganz massive
We have
Demokratie.
a massive crisis in democracy in Europe. It's not only true for Hungary, for Poland, but we
Wenn die
realize that
Konservativen Hand in Hand mit den Rechten marschieren, ist es
go out with the right-wing populists. For us,
Das
then
muss
it's
deutlich
no
sein.
longer possible to lend them a
den
hand.
rechten
Now,
Regierungen
if the conservatives form governments with the right-wing populists, then they beat women in the face. They slash her in the face with the other hand.
Wie schon die Energiekrise, die Care-Krise, ist auch die Demokratiekrise nicht genderblind. Denn kaum wird Demokratie verkleinert oder
This
angeknabbert,
crisis is not gender blind, but
wir Frauen es
whenever there is a crisis, we see that our rights
keinen
are
besseren
infringed on. There is no better indicator for democracy
als gut ausgestattete Frauenrechte. Und weltweit kann man an jedem Land sofort erkennen, wie sieht es denn mit der Demokratie aus, wenn wir wissen, wie es mit den Frauenrechten ausschaut.
What's the situation
Wir sind
when it comes to women's rights?
die sofort
So we
deutlich
are
machen,
the indicators that show immediately when there are deficits or problems in democracy,
Opfer.
but we are also, on the other hand, the victims. If these
Dann sind die
regimes
Frauen
turn more and more fascist, then women are victims number one.
Genderblindheit von
When we talk
Krisen,
about gender blindness of crises, we have to focus
Demokratiekrisen
on democracy crisis. This is
Demokratiekrisen
what women
spüren Frauen am
feel
stärksten.
the most. The first crises in democracy kill women and women's rights
Täglich
on a daily basis in Europe today.
als Vorsitzende, als
As a
Co-Vorsitzende
chair and a co-chair together with Ulrike Hefner of
freuen wir uns, dass
ASF, we're
ihr alle,
very happy to welcome all of you here, our sisters, and a few brothers are here as well.
hier in Berlin,
Welcome. Welcome to all of you, and we do hope
gut
that
funktioniert.
everything works fine. We do hope that you
Aber wir hoffen
feel
vor allen Dingen,
great here. And above all, we hope that you
eure
will
politischen
later
Parteien,
return to your own
Heimfahrt
political
zu euren
parties
politischen Parteien.
after this event and muster enough power to continue your good work.
über
It's
Grenzen
essential
bilden
that
können.
we have
Denn
friendships across borders. Because
können Freundschaften bilden,
left party members, they always fight for international solidarity. They can have friendships. Right-wing parties can never have friendships
Es ist
across
unsere
borders. It is our duty to get
an der
organized.
Stelle Zitat danken.
I would like to thank you all for coming here.
Sie ist die Impulsgeberin.
Sita is next, and she's the impulse giver. She speaks even faster than I do. She is the one, she is the motor, the driver in every session. She is present, very much so. She is always looking at the next point, next item on the agenda. And Sita, I mean, we are really grateful to you. You are a fantastic first woman chair, the chair for Germany, together with Claudia Häfner. I would like to thank you very, very much for your work.
Und wir haben so, komm hier drauf. Und wir haben so kleine
these small post-its with the slogan,
man for this job.
The best man for this job is a woman.
So good, I'm so pleased.
Bitte bedient euch davon, nehmt es mit in eure...
Take it with you, take it to your regions and make good use of it. Thank you very much and see you later.
Your important words and work. I would now like to open the second part of our gathering here, and before we start panel 2 and have a discussion with Katharina Barley, I would like to share a little video that was actually produced by UN Women in Australia, and I think it's quite telling what we will see right now. So I think one isn't sure if one should cry or applaud. It's not really uplifting as expected. It is dystopian. It is sort of dark and a little bit depressing. But now back to the year 2022. Katharina Barley, may you come up here? So you probably all know her. She's Vice President of the European Parliament and a fighter for, also the European dimension and the work of the Social Democratic Party in Germany. We've seen this dystopian idea of the future. We've seen that even we are technically so advanced, we had such great achievements like traveling to the moon. Gender equality in that version of the future isn't a reality. And coming back to the present, do you think actually this will come true? And what should happen that this is not our future?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's really great to be in a room with all these fantastic women and the feminist men that we have. Probably have a few more, and I want to apologize for not coming earlier. I had to replace my party head at the summit of the Progressive Alliance. Well, actually, I'm a very optimistic person always, but I hope I won't make you more depressed now. But this dystopia was about not advancing. And I think actually we're in a different fight at the moment. We have to fight against rollbacks. Or maybe not, I actually don't want to call it rollbacks because it's new developments, and Maria just touched upon that. I mean, when I was young, when I defined myself as being a feminist, I experienced that it's a really hard battle, and it goes step by step, and it goes extremely slowly, but it goes one way. I mean, it gets better. Slowly, 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 but it's getting better. And now, for the last few years, we really have to face it, that's not just, I mean, a natural logic. Mm-hmm. And this is what we see. We see this worldwide development, and I don't know if we're going to touch upon that later, which is not just, you know, male politicians or even females not being feminists and being very conservative. It's a worldwide network of people who want a different world. It's a worldwide network that started in South America in the 60s, who really have that as a political vision, mm-hmm. to not have the state being the one who sets the rules, but being the family and the church. And you know these, maybe you, I guess, I mean, you're all feminists, you will have heard of some of these, of World Congress of Families, of Citizens Go in Spain, of Ordo Juris in Poland. I mean, all these very, very conservative think tanks who really want to get there, who want to say we go back to where the church and the family, meaning the man, the head of the family, dictate the rules. And these networks, these people are gaining power, and we see it everywhere. So, sorry, it's a long answer to your short question, but I fear this. I really fear that might be the truth. Mm-hmm. I don't think so if I look at all these women, but at the moment, being in the year 2022, I fear that it's getting worse.
Mm-hmm. On the panel, we later will then also give you the space to share a little bit your perspective on what's maybe happening in Italy or in Poland. But you were talking a bit about, and we heard democracy in crisis, democracy crisis. This link between democracy and gender equality is obvious. We have data that is backing it up. If there's more democracy, it's also better for women. How do you see this relationship, this democracy in crisis? Is this also concerning for women's rights?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You said it, it's obvious data, and you can see it in a lot of countries in different orders, but it's always, if you have authoritarianism, if you have populism, if you have fascism, it's always the same attacking points. It's always independent justice, it's always free media, it's always critical culture, and it's always the rights of women. Mm-hmm. And maybe, well, not maybe, but nowadays you also have to say, of course, also rights of minorities in general, LGBTIQ people, refugees, these people. So it's. I mean, in Hungary they started with the media, in Poland they started with the justice, but in other countries they start with women. Look at the US. Look at, Roe versus Wade. That was a battle over decades, and at the moment we have to say we lost, and they are going further. They won't stop there. They are going further, and so yes, it's a link, because it's all about total control. It's about a certain group of people having the control over everything. And that means to eliminate the control, which is justice media, to eliminate people who kind of disguise you, which is culture. And of course, it's also control over independent, free, willing
thinkers and doers.
Yes, and people who can challenge you in your sort of birthright is how they see it. And that's women.
Thank you a lot, Katharina.
Thank you.
No, please. we are now opening or enlarging the panel, and I'm very delighted that Nina Unesi is here, the General Secretary of the Swedish Social Democrats. Welcome. Oh, Social Democratic Women, but maybe in the future of the entire Social Democrats. Hopefully. Then there's Simona Lembi. She's coming to us from Italy. And she is responsible for the gender equality plan of Bologna. I think that's really interesting. We're curious to learn more about that. And a lot of people know him. Welcome Robert Bitron, Chair of Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee in the EP. So the second panel has the overarching theme, the umbrella topic of gender equality as a priority, not an afterthought. And when looking at the topic and when we're talking about it, we often recognize that gender equality is recognized at many levels. People give speeches, people call it a top priority, it's part of the SDGs, etc., etc. But when we look on the practical level, when we look at what is executed, we see this big gap. And there are those common excuses, often by men. It's a women's issue. We don't have time for it. The budget is pretty small. We have to skip. So often we hear that it is important to work towards gender equality, but it is still put at the back burner. So like we probably saw in the video. So maybe on this panel, we start with you, Robert, as like the only male speaker on the panel. So you're an outspoken ally for justice and gender equality. And I would love to learn a little bit more about that PES as a political family, that under the PES political work, gender has gained more importance. And we also now have an EU commissioner for equality, not gender equality, for equality and gender equality strategy. But another demand of the PES is a gender equality, diversity, and anti-discrimination configuration for the ministers in the EU Council. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why it is important to have this at this EU powerhouse?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Martin. And it looks like I usually say I'm the only gay in the village, but I see I'm the only man in the village besides you. Are there any other men here in the room? The photographer, thank you for being with us. There are some few. And the interpreters, yes. Well, you may wonder, I was thinking how they will react when they see a man in the panel of PES women. I think this is important that we are here. And I want to say that, paraphrasing Madeleine Albright's words, I really believe, there is a special place in hell for men who do not support women. I really believe that. And I want to say it loud. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I also joined a FAM committee in the European Parliament. And I'm really ashamed that I'm one of only 2 full members of this committee who are male. It shows something because, and let me start with this disproportion, and then I answer your question, which I think answers also your question, why we are struggling with this issue you mentioned. I'm also member of Budget Committee and AFET Committee. Those committees in European Parliament are very important committees, of course. There are men in suits, ties. They're very much dominated by men. So, for example, in the Budget Committee, there is, I think, 41 members, and 30 of them are men, of course. Vera is here, yes. Hi, Vera. So there are only 10 women in this committee. But so where the power and the money are, there are men. When there is no power, and the money are not there, there are women. And I have the same experience from the Polish parliament. It was the same. So I joined FAM committee also to show to other men that it's unfair, it's unjust, and it's not equal. And we must change it in solidarity, because it's still us, men, who hold this, unfortunately, disproportional power. And there is no reason that these few centimeters we hold, we always add few more to it, gives us this power. I find it unjust. And why answering your question? Well, when someone said that we need to take political decisions now and we cannot wait. I really believe that. And it's really very unfair that in European Union, where we decided that we are to lead by example globally, and one of the few things we are to offer globally are human rights. We are still not leading by example in 2022 in gender equality. And I find it shameful. I find it really shameful that we are trying to compete in so many issues. And on this issue, we still not done enough. And we heard today, we have a Commissioner for Equality in the European Commission, which is fantastic. We were fighting for that for many years. And many of my colleagues here were fighting for that, including Zita. We have in European Parliament FAM committee. We were fighting for it for many years. It still doesn't have the position we wanted to have, but we have it. But the most important institution in European Union doesn't have such composition. I'm talking about European Council. And they have, of course, compositions on everything you can imagine. Of course, men created this composition on sport, on economy, on defense, whatever you can imagine. They have this gathering of important ministers, of course, mainly men, except one composition. There is nothing dedicated to equality. Nothing dedicated to anti-discrimination. There is no composition as such. And one of our challenges, and this should be the challenge of PES, especially of our socialist progressive family, is to fight for this composition, because this is where the decisions are being made. This is where the power and the money are, and we should do that. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. I would now travel from Brussels to Sweden. Nina, it's really great to have you. Sweden has a track record of progressive policies. We have parental leave laws that Germans can dream of, or that hopefully will also be adopted one day here. I would now be interested in the question of how did those policies actually also change, like a little bit, the culture and the narrative, because a lot of the inequality we also see in the parliament, we see in EU member states, is also rooted in the way we think about each other, and that's rooted in culture. So how can progressive politics also have an impact on that?
It began, I think, when progressive ideas became feminist too, and that is something that I would like to highlight now. In 2014, the first in the world feminist government was formed in Sweden, led by Stefan Löfven, who we will vote for tomorrow for Congress. The PES Congress will vote for as chairman. Meaning, though, that this would imply that we should do a lot of things in the whole of society. By saying we are feminists, we need to also practice it in everything. So one of the things we did 2014 was integrating gender into every part of the agencies, to government offices, and just statistics gives us so much force to show and highlight the things that we find wrong. But really, it did begin 50 years ago. I represent the women organization of the Social Democratic Party. 50 years ago, the women that led my organization made a policy, a very modern policy document that really did transform society. National ideas for a national childcare system, parental leave, the one you talked about, with the sole intention of getting more women out in the workforce 50 years ago. So we're building our identity, our culture, our values on the work that those women did back then. Since then, of course, we have done many more things, consent laws, feminist foreign policies, and many more things that go in line with the ideas of maintaining and exporting the ideas of feminism and progressive ideas, of course. For me, it's becoming so part of our society that when you ask young girls what issues they think are the most important, young girls will say that gender-based issues are the ones that are most important. However, when you ask the boys the same question, you will get a whole other issue or a whole other answer. Maybe this is the same for every other country too, but when they ask the Swedish boys what they like and think is important to engage in, it's gaming. So meaning we have a lot to do, we have a lot to work with because we see that women are taking place in higher education. They are more than men, and we can see that boys are lacking when it comes to school performances. This will probably make some think that has some feminism gone too far? Of course not, because we have so many more issues to deal with regarding so many more parts of society that needs to be addressed to. Now, this is something, of course, we are proud of. We try to, if you ask a Swedish person about the Swedish model, they will be excited to talk about that. However, not everyone knows what a Swedish model is, and it's not a person, I'm telling you that for certain. It's the years of social engineering putting forth and transforming society. And I would say that we're, and I put myself in this, quite good at it.
But the Swedish model, the situation in Sweden is also maybe changing. Looking at it from an outside perspective, you recently had elections. We see the race and the right wing getting more powerful. What is your take on that? And are you concerned that all those achievements might be challenged, or are they also already so embedded within the culture?
And that's the other side of the coin, because we did have an election, and it was 46,000 votes that made the difference between us. Only 46,000 votes, it's not much. We could have, had we had half of them, we'd probably had another situation. But saying that, it's also important to say that the Social Democratic Party did in fact increase after 8 years of governing in a climate that is very much top of mind for most very manly driven narrative in society, with the crisis of the war, the pandemic, the high inflation, of course, and of course the exceeding costs of electricity. So the agenda was, we shouldn't have won this. I mean, we shouldn't have increased, that is to say. And also on the other side then, all the classical right-wing conservative parties did back, with the exception of one, and that's the one that is rooted in that has roots from with Nazi roots, so to say, conservative party with Nazi roots. They increased. This is a big problem, because if we're talking about a manly driven agenda, this is what this party has. And what we are afraid of within the coming 4 years, it is that they will, slowly, if not fast, we'll see, try to make differences. What will they do? For instance, art is something they pointed at, saying art should not be provocative. This probably is too provocative for them, I would guess. They've also said that they want to do decrease aid relief systems. They want to abolish the gender agency that we've established during the feminist governing years. They want to change the quotations of the parental leave system. Today we have given a couple of months to each parent, not 50-50, but close to. So those are the things they've already said that they want to do. In 4 years, will they manage? Well, this is something we will have to fight against, because we see our part as being some kind of watchdog to make sure that they don't succeed in this mission. Our other job is to look to the future, because we had an election that was very manly driven with this agenda. We need to talk more about the things that really engage our voters, healthcare, the welfare state, also a school. So this is something we need to take back to ourselves and work with more, I think. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for giving us for giving us this insight into what's happening in Sweden and also into your work, into your important work. Thank you. Katharina, hearing this, seeing the bigger picture in Europe, seeing the messages or seeing the election in Italy, seeing how the framing is working there, or how the framing of traditional family, how effective it is, how do you perceive those developments within the EU? Because we see multiple trends that lead into a certain direction.
Yes, we do. Well, for Italy, we have an expert here.
Yeah,
I won't elaborate too much on Italy as a specific case, but yes, we see that there are trends going into this direction, and it's not only in the European Union. I mean, Trump, I already mentioned, but we see it in a lot of other countries. I always like to say that we also see the opposite direction, because we shouldn't get kind of too depressed and think that there is, only one way to go. If we look at, for example, Slovenia, they had an authoritarian prime minister, Janez Janša, good friend of Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban financed some of his election campaign, and they were very close. And he was going exactly the same path. He was, for example, discrediting and denouncing female journalists and calling them prostitutes, for example, things like that. And the Slovenian people kicked him out. Kicked him out with a 42% against him. And I think this is one of the very encouraging. There's someone from Slovenia. Thanks to Slovenia, I was in Bled at the Strategic Forum, and I keep saying Slovenia for me is one of the highlights, which gives hope. But also in Bulgaria, the same thing happened with Borisov. They kicked him out. Unfortunately, things went bad afterwards, but still they do. And look at Iran. I mean, after decades, who might throw over this despotic, this terrible, this terroristic regime? It's the women who do that. So I think we really shouldn't give up hope. But we also have to start from scratch. If you ask what can we do in Europe, I think first of all we have to do awareness raising, because a lot of people, and even women, say, but we can choose now whatever job we want to do, and we can leave our husbands. I mean, we have gained gender equality, more or less. It's not only men, it's also women who say that. And of course, as soon as they reach the glass ceiling, if they have the first child, they realize, oops, I'm not being promoted anymore, and et cetera, et cetera. But we have to start there. We have to get women into the powerful positions. Of course we do. So parity is absolutely key, and I'm happy that Elke Ferner, our dear colleague, is now at the moment in the Bundestag fighting for that.
So, yeah. And also within the progressive parties, right?
Also within the progressive parties. I mean, we have been discussing this now for a while, and I think it's really sad that we didn't manage to get there. In Germany, we have a double presidency, and it's working really, really well. People were very skeptical in the beginning, and it's working really well. It's really equal. They chose different topics, and they really share the burden. Yes, it is also in the progressive family, of course.
Thank you. Now traveling to Italy, to beautiful Bologna. That's where you are from, Simona. You are in charge of the gender equality plan of the city of Bologna. And and a lot of powerful work is happening on the ground, on the local level. That's where we can also learn a lot from. So we would love to hear more about your work and maybe the learnings we can draw from it. Yeah.
So, buonasera a tutte, buonasera a tutti. Also vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Buonasera a tutte. I'm really proud to be here to present to you the Gender Equality Plan.
I will follow in English, of course. And
we just wanted you to practice.
Yeah, the way was so. And I would like to thank the PSE women. First of all, the SPD, thank you for this building and this organization. It's a wonderful thing to understand and to know that we have places like this and to meet each other. And just because I heard Katarina, and I'm very happy that she's so positive thinking about our future, I'm not so positive after our vote. I have to thank PSE women, because with this annual organization and with this annual conference, they told us, and when I say they told us, they tell us in Bologna that we are not only a single national case, but we are part of the same European team. Thank you. About our experience, I hope I will need only a few minutes. Tell me if it's too much. So first of all, when we are speaking about a gender equality plan in the metropolitan city of Bologna, we are speaking about a new local instrument, at least in the local level. We know, of course, the European strategy of equality 2025. We know the Italian equal strategy 21-26, but this is, for us at least, the first case of a new local policy. And this is something that was put off from the new administration, voted and elected 1 year ago, in response of the inequity brought by the crisis. And I want to underline that this is not only a crisis, it's the first one since the new millennium. And the first three crises, 2007, 2008, 2011, and 2015, were particularly important because they were industrial crises. This one is, at least in our nation, a crisis of services. And this is why it's much more paid by the women. So now we have a new local instrument. And I would like to underline that this instrument is composed by 5 areas. So first, it's not a strategy, it's a plan. And a plan means a paper full of actions. And it's composed by 5 areas. The first one is called paid work, action just for balance, the presence in the work between men and women. The second area is unpaid work, because there is a work, it's still a work, even if it's not unpaid. And what we do every day with the babies, with old people, in our home, and so on. The third area is full of action against violence, gender violence. The fourth one is for equality in culture, a culture of equality. And the fifth area is full of action against discrimination and multi-discrimination, so actions for LGBTQ+ communities or migrant and so on. And even if I don't have the time to go deep into the 5 areas, I would like to take a couple of minutes, no more than this, just to explain not only what is this gender equality plan, but how we arrived to this gender equality plan. Because I completely agree with someone who at the beginning said that we have a problem in our democracy. So if you want a gender equality plan, you can have many methods, many ways to do it. And it depends to the idea of equality you have in your mind and in your city. You can have only a bureaucratic paper made in the bureaucratic level. It's something very important. You can have this kind of adoption. Or you can have a gender equality plan put off by the government of our city. When I say the government, I mean a place where you have an homogeneous idea of politics. Or you can measure your idea of equality directly with people in a democratic way. And this is what we did in a specific way. First, the gender equality plan was voted by the council, by the place where take place every part of parties who are elected directly by the citizen. I don't have to explain that the right part of the party didn't vote our plan. This is, of course, naturally. But the responsibility of the vote was put exactly in this place. And this gender equality plan arrived after 7 months of work. 1,000 people meted, and more or less 100 meetings with people who are experts in these 5 fields, with experts of organization, NGOs, feminist organization, LGBTQ+ organization, with citizens as well, because they believe that equality is not a bureaucratic paper, is not only something that can put forward by the government, but is something that we have to measure, to understand, and to fight directly with people and with citizens. This is our first experience.
Thank you a lot. So having a plan is important, not only a strategy. And Robert, I would like you're actually maybe not working, maybe you're working on a plan in the FEM committee among S&D members that you want to call for a women's charter to be implemented. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is it, what is in there, and why is it important? Or is it just another document?
Well, that's an option which, of course, was provoked by the situation and by the backlash which also Katerina was mentioning and many of you today, which we are seeing in Europe. And it's also mainly also because of the sexual and reproductive health rights and access to abortion. I believe personally that if men by biology would have abortion, I think it would be accessible for free, legally, on every corner in every shop. So it's because, of course, it's female thing by biology. It's not accessible, and it's very often illegal. It's a matter of patriarchal system. So we live in Europe of inequalities. We live in Europe where Polish women in 2022 have less rights than when we were entering European Union in 2004. We live in Europe where this backlash has strengthened these inequalities. So it's our responsibility as politicians and as leaders to make it equal, finally, because it's 2022, finally. And that's why we have this initiative. And it's our moral obligation. As you know, I come from Poland, and we were talking today about abortion. And for many of people, it might seem like an abstract issue, but this barbaric legislation, it has its victims. And I wanted to show you today a picture of Isabella. This is Isabella, or I should say, it was Isabella. Isabella was 30 years old when she got pregnant. She made the test, and at this test, she found out that she will have difficulties, and if she gives the birth, the baby will have serious problems. She decided to terminate her pregnancy. She went to a hospital when the barbaric legislation was introduced. Her mother says she was a dreamer. She was in constant contact with her mother. Her last SMS message sent to her mother was, "The baby weighs 485 grams. For now, thanks to the abortion law, I have to lie down, and there is nothing they can do. They will wait until it dies or something starts, and if it doesn't, I can expect sepsis." A few hours later, she died. She was one of the victims of this barbaric legislation we introduced in Poland. We meet in Berlin. I also come from Poland, like Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg died in Berlin. She was revolutionist. She was a dreamer. She was progressive like we are. And one of her famous sentences is, the revolution means also when we say loudly what is happening. And I think it's our obligation to say loudly what is happening. We should be in solidarity wherever we live, wherever we do. And that's why it's so important that especially we as progressives, also men, especially men, who hold the power of keeping the microphones, who hold the power of being co-chairs of the party like myself, who hold still the power, we have obligation to be in solidarity. And I say it as a Polish citizen, where the strongest solidarity movement tear down the Berlin Wall and tear down the communism. And that's our obligation. And to bring some optimism to this discussion, I brought the second picture of a second woman. This is Joanna. Joanna is among us today. She doesn't know that I will show this picture. When Isabella died, Joanna joined the thousands of women in Poland, and she went out of the streets. And Joanna went to the church with the slogan, "Women, you can decide yourself." Few days ago, because of this solidarity, Joanna lost her immunity. She's a member of the Polish parliament, and she's now prosecuted by the Polish prosecutor for immoral behavior and fighting against the Catholic Church. If you can applaud Joanna, who is among us. Joanna, can you show yourself? She's the real hero. So, if you want to have a proof why we need to have abortion in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, why we need this European Charter of Women's Rights, this is the proof. This is why we need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This was quite moving. Johanna, this wasn't planned, but if you like, there's a microphone, and if you want to share some thoughts, please.
Is it working? Okay. I would like to invite you for our European Congress to Toruń. It will be the 22nd of October. It will be next Saturday. We are organizing with Katarzyna a huge event, and we will talk about abortion. We'll talk about Ukraine and war in the Ukraine, especially about rapes for women. And of course, we'll talk about church and why church is the best enemy for a woman. And if some of us, would you like to come to Toruń, I would like to invite you, and if you would like to take a picture with our slogan. The slogan is, we do the work. In Poland, we said, robimy robotę. I have some posters to put the pictures. And Katarzyna, would you like to say something? Yeah. To help me? Yes. She's my friend from Poland. We're organizing together this event.
Hello. Oh my gosh, that wasn't planned, totally. But once I have the microphone, hello once again. Once I have the microphone and the power, as Robert said, I want to invite you to Toruń. Come to us next week. We'll be talking, of course, about abortion. Tomorrow, Ursula was talking about it. Tomorrow morning, there is a trial of Justyna. If she will be persecuted, she will be the first European activist that will be persecuted for helping women to get access to abortion. When I said in the Polish parliament, I helped women, I help women, and I will be helping women, Ordo Juris is saying we will meet in court, right? So what they are trying to do is they are trying to scare us. We definitely need your support, because remember, what happened in Poland can happen anywhere. Thank you.
Can I say one sentence more? I think in this discussion it's very important to talk about relationship between government and church. We have a very bad situation about this in Poland, and we have in another discussion, in another meetings, we have to talk about this as well. Because, you know, they make a lot of bad things with us, but, you know, we will never stop fight.
Thank you so much, you two. So we are adjusting the agenda a bit. Sorry. No, it's really good. So I want to ask you, Simona and Katharina, a little bit the role of church, and because also in Italy it played a role. And Katharina, you heard all of this. What are you thinking about it? And also, what is the role of progressives in this? How to react? How to? Yeah, please.
Well, first of all my respect, of course, to you two and to all the Polish women who take up the fight, because the church, especially in Poland, is a mighty enemy. I mean, you really need courage for that. So keep strong. Now I mentioned it before that these networks that they have to do with church. Now, maybe some of you are religious and are in church and really don't want to insult anyone's feelings. It's not about that. It's not about religion. It's about churches as an institution. So for example, when it comes to this gender gaga, I don't know if you have that in every language. We have that in German very much, that the far rights, and now even the just normal conservatives, they try to mock people who speak about gender issues. It's gender blah blah or something like that. Now the idea of this actually was born in the Vatican. This is something that is really church-based, because this goes against gender equality as we fight for, goes against the order that the church thinks it's right, you know. And who is in the Vatican? I don't think you find too many women there. Right, thanks. And this trickles into society. This is why I meant awareness. We also have to be aware. And I know friends in my surroundings, they're really good people, but they say, I can't stand this gender blah blah anymore. And this is the first point where you have to say stop. It's not gender blah blah. It's about equality. And look at this and that and that and that. And we are not equal yet. And we're fighting with it. And that is a human right. And it has nothing to do with blah blah. So stop that. We have to be very clear already there. But what I'm saying is, this is not someone just saying that. This is a strategy. That is what I meant. And in Poland, you have Ordo Juris, that is this think tank that has been at least, I mean, why do I say that? Robert is Polish, he knows it. Yes, it's true, it's my yes, I don't dare to travel to Poland anymore, actually. But Ordo Juris is an extremely conservative, church-based think tank, and they were actually behind the judgment, behind the decision of the Polish Constitutional Court that led to this abortion right. You know, when our colleagues in the European Parliament say it was civil society who asked for this decision to practically ban abortion, that was a court decision to practically ban abortion. It was not civil society, it was Ordo Juris doing this. So it was a church-based with a government-linked institution. And that is why I'm saying independence of the judiciary is not something abstract. You see it here very clearly, that if you lose that, you also, as a woman, lose the right to defend your human rights. So you see this going on, and you see that oh, Irache is there. Oh, hi. Hi. So we see that this is church-based, and I'm sorry, there's so much to say about this. I try to be short, but by total accident, I found out. You know, I'm a lawyer, so I work very much in rule of law, etc. I found out that on the Polish list for the judges. For the European Court of Human Rights, they give lists of proposals from every country, and the first person on the list of Poland was the head of Ordo Juris. Now imagine that, and it was pure coincidence that I saw that, and I called my German colleague. I used to be in the German Parliament, so I know the people. He was in charge for the election system of these judges, and I said, Is a conservative, but a good one. And I said, I have to really warn you, if you selected the Polish judge, the number one is from Ordo Juris. And there was... Yes, this Ordo Juris is this organization that I was talking about. It's framed as a think tank, but it is not. It's a church-based, it's this church-based government-related organization, so to say. And I said, he's from Ordo Juris. And there was silence on the other side of the phone. And I said, you know what Ordo Juris is? And he said, no. And that is part of the problem. Yeah. Even in the European Parliament, our colleagues don't know. You know, not all of them, by far not all of them. So, of course, we prevented this man from being elected, but I know that Ordo Juris people have trickled into United Nations organizations, for example. So you know, it's not being, we really have to be aware that this is not because Kaczynski had a disturbed relationship with his mother, which he probably had, I don't know. He lived with her, I think, until she died all alone. However, I don't want to judge anyone living like that, but it's not by coincidence. It's an ideology that is spreading, and it is an ideology that is very well connected, and I forgot to say that, and then I finished, sorry. And it is extremely well funded. Behind that is, for example, the radical church people in the US. Have you heard of Betsy DeVos? She used to be the education minister with Trump. They have a foundation that is worth billions. And they put their money in there. The oligarchs in Russia put their money there. Because they also want a society like that, where the women are being kept silent. So we really have to be aware this is a big, big enemy that we're having, so we really have to stand together and be strong.
I think it would be, just quickly, it was really worth it that we took the time, as we really have to finish on time. No, please, I really invite you to share some thoughts, but maybe short and precise, and we can combine it with my very last question. And I would love to end this panel on a hopeful note. So maybe you respond a little bit on the church issue, but also share one thought, one development that gives you hope and that spreads hope. And yeah, everyone 2 minutes.
So I have 2 minutes for answer the first question.
No, we're
and
negotiating.
The second one. Okay. No.
No, but as the church is a tough enemy.
Well, I have the second wish.
You have
I have the second wish. Okay. So first of all, thanks, Katarina, because her answer is perfect. I completely agree with her. I don't have much more to answer about this question. Just to explain that Italy is the place with the Vatican, it's true. But please don't remember that Italy is the state of Machiavelli as well. And since 5 centuries, we know that church and policy has to have 2 different and independent places. So please, Italy is a like place, and I would like to give all my solidarity to the sister in Poland and to explain that the Italian Democratic Party is with you and the women of the Democratic Party are with you and your fight. Please don't forget this. As the second question, I would like to speak about the gender equality plan, and I will tell you something about the gender equality, not exactly our plan, but I think that if there is a place where there is no equal possibility of career between men and women, there is a problem. This is my answer to the first question of Vatican and to the second, what I hope.
Okay, thank you a lot. Who wants to go next? What gives you hope? What leaves hope? What spreads hope?
It's not about the Vatican, though.
That's okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Thank you for telling us all of these things that happen in Poland. It really does strike a note of, solidarity and sisterhood too. But on a positive note, I'm a firm believer of never letting a good crisis go to waste. And being crisis the theme of this, make sure to use it to advance. What a crisis does is it puts urgency and necessity for change also. And make sure you use that to expand the rights or development or for the women that suffer the most in your countries. And I will just give an example of that, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So during the pandemic, we had a situation that I think you all share with many difficulties. But we also saw that when we are going to help the people, I mean, of course we have to do that. This is a good time to change the policies that we didn't have the mandate in the parliament to do. We have a conservative parliament. We had a conservative parliament and a government that was led by social democrats. So you understand the conflict there. The pandemic, the crisis, made it urgent to actually address these issues. So we knew that we had to go in with substantial relief for enterprises, for keeping workplaces functioning, for the manly-based organizations and industries that we talked about earlier today. But we also knew that when we do that, we can also make our liberal and conservative friends agree on changing the legislation for social systems, the ones that women benefit the most from. And now this is the positive note. So the pandemic ends, right? The crisis ends. And so do the loans and aids and that sort of thing that we've, put to these manly-based industries mostly. But the legislation does not. So when the crisis ends, the legislation does continue, and it still continues. And this is what makes me hopeful, that if we never let a good crisis go to waste, we will be able to put forth reforms that will last beyond the crisis. And this is my hope for the future too. Now we'll see what happens with the new parliament, but I mean, this is how we worked.
Thank you a lot. The hopeful note, either Robert or Katharina. Both of you.
Well, I can be very short. I talked so much, I'll be very short now. My hope is, I see what happens when women discover their force. And we all see it. We see it in Poland. And I'm convinced that it's going to be the women, the decisive force, who's going to throw this government out of power. And they will next year. I hope you will. Stay strong. We see it in Iran. I just mentioned that, of course. And I think we also will see it in Russia. I mean, now there are slight protests coming up, and it's going to be the women again. We saw it in Argentina. We see it in Belarus. Yes, we see it everywhere. If women are conscious of what they are able to do and what force they are, then we can overturn just about everything. And I'm sure, I'm confident that women will discover their forces.
3 seconds. 3 seconds. I know my wish. My wish is the next annual conference of women of the PES will take place in Italy.
Oh.
So I brought also today this map. And as a chair of FAM committee, I have, I think, dozens of maps like this showing gender inequalities. This one shows, this is contraception policy atlas. You can see inequalities clearly on this map. And I think many women today are conscious of these inequalities. Women are conscious, thanks God, mentioning the church, of these inequalities And thanks God, they're unstoppable in executing their rights. They know that it's their body, it's their life, and it's their decision about many of things. And I understand that today, and we as men, we created this situation. Women's body is a battleground, but women know how to defend it already, and they will be unstoppable in defending their rights. And we as men, we must be in solidarity with women. And this is what I believe. And I believe that one day, Polish women, Italian women, Slovak women, Hungarian women will finally have equal rights with Belgian women, Spanish women, French women, and women all around the world, because you are unstoppable. I really admire you. Good luck. Thank you.
So thank you to everyone. Thank you for bringing in your perspective and expertise. And I would now like to give the floor to the S&D Group President and first Vice President of PES. Yeah. So So the sad thing is, we really have to end this panel like really on time, and yeah, maybe we can continue the discussion afterwards. Yeah, but I sadly really have to stick to the agenda, and yeah. I don't know if you have further thoughts on that, Katja, but yeah. So, thank you, warm welcome.
Thanks a lot, dear sister. Really, it's very impressive for me to be here today with all of you. Thank you, Sita. Thank you for your work during this time, and of course, thank you for this extraordinary cooperation. We have, as a political family, we have a lot of things to do. Of course. We have a lot of to do, and we will do it together. We are building a progressive and feminist political family, and we will continue working on it. Dear sisters, please allow me to start my speech today by congratulating the two female Nobel winners, Agnieszka Ernaux in literature and Caroline Bertozzi in chemistry. In the 120 years history of these awards, there have been more than 900 winners, but only 60 were women, only 6%. It is true that women were able to access higher education much later than men, but it is also true that today women represent more than 60% of a new university graduates. One of the possible reasons for this lack of women is that the jury is made up mostly of men who vote for other men. Another worrying explanation is that though women are often part of the team, but they are invisible. And this is the main problem. Women are there, but they are invisible, and they are not leading. Girls lack female role models and might think that some professions are not for women because all the famous names are men, or even worse, some might think that women are not intelligent enough, as a police member told me once, and you remember when? We need a female role model to fight against stereotypes and advance in the goal of achieving gender equality. We need women leading in leading positions, and by the way, this is one of the topics addressed by Annie Ernaux in her books. But the glass ceiling is the force for breaking. It is getting harder, and now we start talking about the diamond ceiling. Every year, we hope that the situation will improve and women will finally occupy their rightful place in all areas of society. And every year, we find that the progress is very slow. And what is worse, we even experience setbacks. And we could listen to our colleagues in this experience. We know that our rights never will guarantee for the future if we doesn't work for it. This is very, very clear. The figures are better. The figures are better for Europe, but even so, the European Institute of Equality calculates that we still need 60 years to achieve gender equality. Though this calculation was made before the COVID crisis, we know that this situation today are worse. We have suffered a terrible pandemic that has brought us face to face with a difficult reality. When a crisis hits our economy, women are always the most affected. All experts agree that women have been the most affected by the pandemic crisis. The economic crisis generated as a result of the pandemic has also struck them harder. And we can speak about what is happening with the more difficult and precarious jobs, always for the women. The latest forecast indicates that women's participation in the labor market has fallen several points and that the gender pay gap has increased. And for this, it's very important to work as we are doing in the PES in cooperation with the S&D Group with this transparent directive, because it's important, and I'm sure that our dear Commissioner Dalli will fight with us on this direction. And when it seems that we were coming out from the crisis, we have suffered a brutal blow. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and a war has broken out of the gates. In wars, everyone loses, but those who suffer the most are vulnerable people, especially children and other dependents. And it is mainly women who are taking care of them in difficult conditions. The war has brought higher prices in energy, transport, and food. Once again, women are in the group the most affected by the crisis, as they have lower salaries, higher rates of unemployment, and face a bigger risk of poverty. Once more, we come to the importance of having more women in the leading positions where decisions are made. Measures to combat the crisis are being taken mainly by men because globally, most political and economic leaders are men. To ensure that more attention is paid to the needs and demands of women, we need more women making decisions. Without the full participation of women in strategic decision-making for the building of a sustainable and equal society, the goal of achieving full equality will be more difficult to reach. Experience shows that when there are more women in decision-making, policies benefit families, women, and society in general much more. Experience has also proved that by including women in the decision-making process, countries have managed to increase their equality and develop index. We must recognize the special capacity of women to reflect and to respond to crises through a humanitarian approach. It's important to understand that the participation of women can also lead to a faster resolution of conflicts. Women in positions of authority tend to resolve national crises without resorting to violence, advocate for social issues that benefit all. The underrepresentation of women in the decision-making means that the highly skilled and necessary female capital potential remain a tap. Various studies have shown that there is a correlation between the improvement of the economy and financial result of companies, that are present of women in their decision-making bodies. Women's leadership promote innovation, generate more accurate decision-making instance, and promote the incorporation of talented professional profiles. It is necessary to promote the participation of women in decision-making not only through positive measures such as quota and SIP list, that of course it's necessary, and you know perfectly well my position about it, but it's necessary to increase our participation with the legislation, mandatory legislation, to guarantee that not only progressive women in our political family will be. We are very solidar with all women in all political families, and we want to fight for them. Usually, we are working for them, and at the end, they will be in our position. I'm very proud to be president of the S&D group with extraordinary women in this group, with my colleagues. I'm here with a lot of important colleagues in our group, leading the feminists, because you have to know that if someone asks in the European Parliament about the group who are more feminists, everybody recognizes that it's the Social Democrats group. This is very clear. And we have a lot of women members feminists, and we have men feminists. This is the next step. Dear friends, dear sisters, we need more men understanding that it's essential to work for more equal society. We are working on it, step by step, but we want to do it faster. We cannot use more time. We will work on it. And I know that I can count on you, Sita. We have a lot of work to do, and I know that you will build an extraordinary team to continue this important fight for a more feminist Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Irache. I want to thank, on behalf of the whole team, all the speakers, everybody who contributed to this conference, the guests who came, the technicians and the interpreters, and also the catering, and of course the whole team of the PES that is helping us out. So it's a team effort. Of course, you're all invited to the reception that starts at 7 downstairs in the atrium. But before that, we would like to invite you, and before you leave the room, because the SPD organized some solidarity pictures for the Iranian women, all women around the world. So if we could gather in front of the stage and our photographer would do a picture, and afterwards I asked the PES women members to stay. But for the people online, this is the end of the conference. So thanks for joining us, and yeah, huge applause to everyone. Thanks.